All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Tim Profeta. I'm a senior fellow at the Nicholas Institute at Duke University and a professor at the Sanford School, and I'm really glad to be here with you. And I'm really very appreciative of Kristina, JC, and Jack for taking the time to come talk to us. We had a little fun with the title of our panel, rocket fuel, but I think it's actually apt. We've been hearing over the past 24 hours how important the tax provisions of the IRA have been to the sort of the clean energy and clean tech investment that we're seeing. We've heard of it as a renaissance and an incredible acceleration. And my three colleagues here, we have three people who really help us talk to what those provisions are, how they're being rolled out, and how they're motivating clean technology. I'm going to start with introduce them quickly. Kristina Costa is the Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy for Clean Energy Innovation Implementation at the White House. She works with John Podesta in his office that's helping and taking the lead in executing the IRA. There she works chiefly on the implementation of the IRA's clean energy and climate provisions. Joined the White House in 2022 from the State Department, where she was working for the Deputy Secretary of State. But Kristina has been a veteran of climate and clean energy policy in DC for years, having worked in the Obama White House as advisor to the Council of the President, working primarily on the Obama administration's climate action plan. So thank you, Kristina, for being here. JC Sandberg is also with us today. He is the Chief Advocacy Organization for the American Clean Power Association, where he leads the state and federal advocacy work as well as the legal team at ACP. Before that, he was at GE Renewable Energy, leading global government affairs. JC's, though, been working on infrastructure and energy and environmental issues since we worked together in the Senate 20 years ago. And has really brought a strategic voice to ACP as they ramp up and to the opportunity that is before the renewable power sector. Lastly, Jack Thirolf is the head of energy policy at Net Power. Net Power is a local company based out of Durham, North Carolina, a truly innovative company that has a novel turbine technology that produces power from natural gas without any smokestacks or emissions. Jack, you can do much better than I can, but it's really not your grandfather's CCS technology. Jack just came to Net Power recently, where before that he was at Enel, the renewables company, where he really got to know the tax code and its influence on the renewable sector as well. Jack started in the sector at the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try and have a little bit of conversation. I'm going to ask each of you to frame up a little bit your thoughts on the tax code and its influence on clean technology. Have a little conversation, and then I'm going to try and draw this. If I wanted to draw you guys forward in the room, draw the audience in with questions as well. So I'm going to start with Kristina. Kristina, I think all three of you just arrived today, but over the last 24 hours in this conference, there's been a ton of discussion about how important these tax provisions are to stimulating investment in clean technology. We're also sort of how important it is to get the government's voice in and the guidance and everything we need to give some confidence to investors. They know how how these are going to be treated, what's going to be recoverable through the tax code. Like, I know you know this. But maybe if I could just ask you to start with just your strategy of your office for how to execute these provisions and sort of get as much of the investment rolling that they're trying to stimulate as possible.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Thanks so much for having us, and thanks everyone for joining us for this conversation. I think when folks become interested in clean energy or in climate change, they don't think that they also need to be really interested in the tax code. But in the United States, it really helps because that is how we are driving the lion's share of the emissions reductions that President Biden has pledged to achieve between now and 2032, and then between then and 2050. So the Inflation Reduction Act is the single largest investment in clean energy and in combating climate change in U.S. history. And the lion's share of that is flowing through the tax code. The law contains about 24 new and expanded tax provisions, primarily targeted at businesses, to incentivize investments in clean energy generation, deployment, manufacturing, across basically every sector, from power to transportation to manufacturing to industrial decarbonization. That is a giant task. This law passed in August of 2022. It is, functionally a giant tax reform package. Giant tax reform packages typically take 2 or 3 years to do regulations. We are setting a much more blistering pace than that. Since as of last month, we have issued at least initial guidance on 18 of the 24 provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's basically one a month since the law passed. And 3 of those tax provisions actually don't even become available until 2025. So depending on how you want to count, maybe it's like 18 out of 21. If you really want to grade on a curve, since we're here at a university. But how we've approached doing this, the way the tax code, the way the tax incentives in the IRA are structured are pretty unique. Because there are bonus incentives sprinkled throughout the law to encourage the private sector to invest in the right way. And so across several of the law's provisions, developers, taxpayers get a 5x bump on the value of the tax credit if they pay their workers prevailing wages and utilize registered apprenticeships on the project, so that we are building a strong pipeline of a clean energy workforce, since we know that this is going to be a decade after decade project to transition the U.S. energy system to a 100% clean energy system. So that is a major incentive. There's a 10% bonus for investments in clean energy generation that are placed in service in historic energy communities, in places like coal country and in places with high employment rates in fossil fuel industries, so that, again, these places that have been economically reliant historically on fossil generation can increasingly see the benefits, the job benefits, the local economic development benefits from clean energy. There is another 10% bonus credit for utilizing domestic content in a clean energy project, so that all of the manufacturing investments that we are seeing come online, there's an incentive for developers to buy the products that they are putting out. And you're creating jobs throughout the clean energy sector, throughout the clean energy supply chain. JC is going to tell me that the guidance we put out doesn't work, which we know, we're working on fixing it. There's another 10% bonus. Are you getting a theme for small projects, small wind or solar projects that are placed in service in low-income communities or that deliver economic benefits to low-income communities? And so all of these things together create a really powerful incentive. Some folks think of it as like a layer cake, where you have your base tax credit, and then you get a bonus for doing right by your workforce, and you get a bonus depending on where you're locating your project, and you get a bonus depending on what components you're putting into how you're sourcing the products that you're using to build your project. And all of those things together work to not only accelerate investment in clean energy, but to do it in a way that shares the benefits broadly through the American economy across the country, and benefits families. The other thing that I think is very exciting about what is in the Inflation Reduction Act on the tax side, as well as actually on the grant side, is that we have a number of really powerful new financing mechanisms that are going to and are already starting to transform the way that clean energy projects are built and financed and capitalized. And so there are two incentives in the tax code. One is called transferability. And so this allows private companies to sell their tax credits to other buyers other corporate buyers who want to lower their tax liability for, various financial reasons. And that means that, more startup companies, smaller companies that may not want to play in the very complicated tax equity market, which is still hugely important, but who just haven't, the math hasn't mathed for them to really take advantage of traditional tax equity finance structures. Now they can sell their credits in a market. They're getting like 97 cents on the dollar in many cases. And we're seeing a really robust response. There was just an article in the Times earlier this week that 45,000 projects have already registered to transfer credits through this new mechanism, and we only put that guidance out last June. We haven't even gone final on it yet. So once we do, I think we're going to see just a huge uptake of this tool, and it's lowering the cost of capital for projects. It's helping more projects get financed and built. The second thing, which for those of you who are here from states or cities or nonprofit organizations or who work here at UNC, is a wild new tool called direct pay. Technically it's called elective pay, but we like to call it direct pay, which enables for the first time ever entities that do not owe federal tax, your states, your cities, your towns, your territories, your counties, your nonprofit organizations, your churches, your public universities, your public hospitals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to receive a payment from the IRS equivalent in value to the tax credit that a private entity would have received. And so that means if you are buying electric vehicles for your city fleet, if you are buying electric or zero emissions municipal buses, if you are building community solar projects, you can get on the back end of that project a guaranteed payment that is uncapped, that is not competitive, that is not going away anytime soon from the federal government. And so we issued final guidance on that a couple weeks ago and expect to see a lot more projects getting planned and built and financed as a result of that tool as well. And so, right now we're in a sprint to get as much guidance out as quickly as we can to provide clarity and certainty, principally to the private sector, since this is a government-enabled, private sector-led approach to combating climate change, building a clean energy economy. But there's going to be a really long tail for these provisions as well, which is what makes implementation such a wild ride.
That was a tour de force. That was awesome. 97 cents on the dollar they're getting in the transferability market right now that's an impressive number, knowing where, like in the tax equity market, where that is. So that could change the economics of some projects. JC, you have a lot of members who are in the middle of this renaissance. What are you seeing from your members? How are you reacting? What are the most important provisions? Is it a true renaissance, or are we really seeing the sort of acceleration of zero carbon investments that we've been hearing about for the last 24 hours?
Well, thank you. I always feel weird holding a mic like this. It feels like we're getting ready to stand up and sing.
You're welcome to do that too.
No, I won't. We were just talking about karaoke before. So first, as an industry association, we represent very large utility scale developers, buyers, the banks financing them, the companies making the solar panels and the wind turbines and the batteries and the energy storage batteries, those types of things. So we have an interesting perspective on the market as our members are out in that space and investing literally tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in these projects. It's been an interesting partnership for us as we, as Kristina said, government-enabled, private sector-led. Having been on both sides of the debate, so when I say both sides of what was Build Back Better that became IRA, and then now working with Kristina and others in government to set out the implementing regulations. Why does that matter? It matters because capital chases certainty, and as we invest this money, the investors and the people behind these projects will not invest if there isn't certainty, and so guidance is critical to that certainty. Kristina mentioned transferability. Tax equity, we could unpack for, I'm sure, with questions and answers for hours and hours. Tax equity is the thing that drives our industry. Well, what is tax equity? This is a fascinating phenomenon that's been going on for over 20 years, which is the entities building these projects are really not big enough to have the tax appetite to monetize the incentive that drives the industry. So that, long ago, spawned this tax equity industry, or what has classically been very large banks, for the most part, come in and offer to monetize the tax attributes of those that are being spun off by those projects, be they the investment tax credit, be they the production tax credit. They come in and they monetize that. What did the IRA do? The IRA, put it on steroids, right? That need for tax capacity with all kinds of various tax credits. So one, I think Kristina talked a little bit about transferability. That is an important tool, not perfect. There are two parts of these projects' tax attributes. One is the actual tax credit itself. Another piece of that is accelerated depreciation. The transferability market really doesn't deal with the accelerated depreciation piece, which can be as much as 10 cents on a project dollar. So if that's not the case, how do these special purpose entities that are the project companies monetize that? How do they take that? Can their parent take that? Can they spread it over a broader suite of projects? So that's still to be developed. The other thing is that it's not, as Kristina said, a replacement for tax equity. Tax equity still, you need all of the above. Transferability is accretive to the tax equity market, but you need all of it given the kind of these huge projects. You know, imagine a $4 billion offshore wind project needs 30% of that amount in an investment tax credit. That might be, you do two of those, that might be what a bank had tax capacity for in any one given year. So you're starting to understand the orders of magnitude of this. I will say this, Kristina has been a fantastic partner in this. She is, it's not an understatement to say that she is the hub of the conspiracy. She really is. And so, but it's not perfect, right? This, and it's hard because we were talking, and Tim and I have probably been having this discussion for over 20 years, which is we don't really have energy policy in this country per se, right? We make energy policy through the tax code, which is an imperfect vehicle for that. And so as we work together on this, there have been some bumps in the road. Domestic content and kind of incentivizing domestic manufacturing has been one of those. We'll figure that out, we'll iron it out. But that has been an example of something that maybe needs a little work. Transferability is an example of something that has worked, right? I think some of the things that are coming soon on offshore wind kind of are enablers. I am bullish about this industry, obviously. I've spent the last 15 years doing this, first at GE here and globally, and then the last 3 totally focused on the US market. But our members are ready. We're ready to do it. We can talk later about some of the limitations to deployment, and we'll save that for questions. But again, the future is bright. Sometimes it feels like every day is a crisis, but that's okay. The future is bright, and the trend line is heading where it needs to head.
Yeah, well, we're trying to do 24 guidances in however many months. Every day can be a fire drill, right? Yeah. That's Jack, we talk a lot about these tax credits, and people usually gravitate to the clean energy tax credit, but there really are a whole suite of different tax credits are really focusing on a whole suite of different frontiers of clean technology. Your company has sort of a particular interest in one, the 45Q carbon capture utilization sequestration credit. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that, and maybe we can use this sort of as a case study of the diversity of sort of incentives that the tax code holds for clean tech?
Absolutely. And Tim, thank you everyone for being here. And Tim, congratulations on having the most exciting and best title for a panel during this conference. And
it should have been sustainable aviation fuel, which would have had a tax credit too. But yeah.
No comment.
So that's good. And thank you to Kristina and just the entire team. I don't think people necessarily realize all the work that goes into trying to get these very complicated provisions dealing with scores of industries, get them done right. And not everything is perfect, but everything is really, really good. And I think sometimes, it's easy when a law gets passed and there's a ceremony, that's great, but a lot of the work is done. And I think we oftentimes underappreciate it. I'll take a second to just introduce Net Power, because who we are is probably less apparent than what the White House is or what the Solar, Wind, and Energy Storage Trade Association is. So we're headquartered in Durham. We're a technology company that uses natural gas to produce electricity while inherently capturing all of the emissions. It is a different type of natural gas turbine. It's not one that has existed before. When you think about carbon capture and storage from fossil fuel power plants, you usually think there's a fossil fuel power plant, it exists. What can we bolt onto it to make it pollute less? That is not what we do. We wanted to use natural gas because we think it's going to be necessary to help catalyze and integrate a fully decarbonized grid led by renewables. But we need to design something totally new, and that's what our technology is. It's taking a step back and saying, what's the gas turbine of the future? The front end is a air separator. We get pure oxygen. We combust it with natural gas. CO2 is actually the working fluid. CO2 is what spins the turbine. That is unique, and what comes out on the other side is water, which is good. We can recycle, power, which we need, and then CO2 at a very high concentration that is ready to sequester. And our advantage is that we think we can produce electricity at a low price, a competitive price, and we can site these projects exactly where they're needed for system reliability, for to be able to flexible with other resources, and then right on top of places where we know we can sequester the CO2 permanently. That's our business. Again, headquartered in Durham, really, really smart people came up with this idea. We're now trying to scale it up. We're building our first project in West Texas. It'll come online in 2027, and then we'll go from there. So underpinning all that, or helping accelerate that in the United States, is the 45Q tax credit. That tax credit gives companies that capture CO2 and sequester it $85 per ton for 12 years, and that is in some ways like a shadow price for, we don't have an economy-wide regulation on what is the cost or what is the value of CO2 emissions. The tax credit helps sub in for that, and it helps give us certainty to know that we can build a power plant that will last for 30 years, supply zero emission power, and this is helping incentivize it. Because otherwise, if you're just competing against a power plant that uses the same fuel, but that emits and creates pollution, it'd be hard for us to compete against that, right? We're not seeing the value, we're not getting the push to do what we think we do need to do and where the market's gonna be. Other places in the world don't rely on the tax regime in the same way, but we do think 45Q is an incredibly powerful tool. That credit, along with a few others, also benefit from direct pay, which is the provision that was new in IRA that allows you to get essentially a refund on your taxes instead of having to claim the credit. The rationale, roughly or simplifying, was that these are new technologies. It'll be harder to finance them because they are new, and that's why direct pay is an especially great tool, not just for municipalities and churches and others who otherwise weren't able to use the credits, but also for those newer technologies. So we are really excited about developing out our business and then using the 45Q credit to scale up. And then as we do that, the benefit will be, again, being able to back up and to help firm up a broader array of variable energy resources that, it sounds weird to say, but like well-established big wind and solar that everyone knows will be the new kind of innovative thing that helps it come together.
Seems like silver buckshot. There's a complementarity between what you're trying to do with zero emissions and other sort of more intermittent things that we hear about. You can provide a reliably backstop.
It's like peanut butter and jelly. Yeah, they go well together.
All right. So Kristina, thinking about 45Q, I think when people think about the tax credits, they think about, okay, there's the clean energy tax credit, that's EV tax credit I can take on my taxes. Maybe somebody's looked in and found something they can do with their household, but let me give you the opportunity to talk about the tax credits people don't really know that are there. Like, what are the ones that you kind of wish had got a little bit more press? That might, like, I think there's a nuclear tax credit in here. What are the various tax credits that aren't always on the front of the press report?
What are my sleeper favorite tax credits?
Yes.
I love all of my tax credit children.
Oh, they're all the same.
So
yeah, equally.
yes, they're all above average. So 24 tax provisions, as we've been talking about, sort of the big movers for achieving the president's climate goals and power sector decarbonization goals are these big power sector credits that you will get for building and uprating clean energy generation. I will say that one thing I think that has kind of flown under the radar so far, but will not in the next few months as we move to propose rules, is that for 30 years, these credits have, the production credit and the investment credit, have been technology specific. The laws passed by Congress have said, okay, if you're building this kind of facility, you can use this kind of credit. If you're building this kind of facility, you can use this kind of credit. The IRA is going to change all of that starting next year. Both the production and the investment tax credits will switch to being technology neutral credits for facilities with net zero emissions. So we are engaged in a super fun policy process to figure out how to make that work. But basically, there'll be differentiated treatment if you are a facility that does not combust things. If you are a non-combustion or gasification facility and you are zero emitting, you'll be in a table and you'll know what to do. And in the law, if you are a combustion or gasification facility, you have to complete a life cycle greenhouse gas analysis to determine what your emissions rate is. And so that is going to create a lot of opportunity for projects and for companies like the ones that we've been talking about up here to choose sort of which credit approach, whether sort of a percentage based on the amount that you invested to build the facility, or an ongoing 10-year credit based on how much you're generating, which one of those is better for you financially. But it is, like I said, long tail. There's going to be a lot of work to figure out how to make the rules that we are putting together right now work, and a lot of need for input from industry on top of the framework that we will put out, because inevitably, no matter how much time we spend talking about these things internally in the government, and no matter how many helpful sort of upfront comments we receive and suggestions we receive from our industry partners, there's always things that people haven't thought about, especially as you're trying to staple these technology questions and these energy policy questions into a tax code that is fundamentally not designed to be about technology or about energy policy, and the two languages don't always speak to each other perfectly the first time. But so that's like those are going to drive a huge amount of the emissions reductions that we're getting from the Inflation Reduction Act. I think it's also many of the tax credits start to phase out sort of early in the 2030s. These two are a little weird in that they start to phase down in the later of 2032 or the year after the Secretary determines that power sector emissions have reached 25% of 2022 levels. I don't know, when's that going to be?
When we fix the problem.
When we fix the problem. So it's very likely that these credits and all those bonuses that I was talking about earlier, which sit on top of them, will last beyond 2032 in whatever form we put out. So this is like a huge, huge opportunity. But that is, that's the tip of the iceberg. Also in the clean power space, we do have a credit 45U. I'm just going to make you all learn the names and numbers because I had to. 45U supports existing nuclear. That is one of the ones that is not yet in effect, but will be soon. 45Q you just heard about was around before the IRA, got extended in the IRA to further incentivize capture and sequestration of carbon emissions. 45V, my absolute favorite child, is a tax credit to incentivize the production of clean hydrogen, which is an industry that is very nascent. Many diverse and passionate views about how that credit should work and what it should incentivize as we look to generate more clean hydrogen in this country in order to decarbonize heavy industry and long haul transportation and shipping and these really hard to abate sectors. Do I have a sleeper favorite? There's credits for sustainable aviation fuel, for clean fuels that'll come into effect next year more broadly, and maybe my sleeper favorite actually, as I'm thinking about my little chart, is that we have a credit 30C, which is the alternative fuel refueling property credit. Very catchy. But basically, this is a credit that is available both to individuals and to businesses for installing EV charging or other alternative fuel charging, refueling infrastructure, like hydrogen fueling infrastructure. And it's a little wacky because there are geographic limitations in the statute that limit the availability of the credit. But basically, this will help fill the hole. The bipartisan infrastructure law has a provision to build EV charging out along major thoroughfares, along highways, and which is very important to electrify the Great American Road Trip. But that is not covering the entire country. It is not covering all the places that we need to build out EV charging infrastructure. So this credit is really aimed at ensuring that there are incentives and that the cost is brought down for installing charging infrastructure, again, both in homes and businesses, in rural areas, in exurbs, in the places that might not be sort of top of the list for the companies that are looking to build out this infrastructure in the first instance, but where it's really important to have the infrastructure in place to enable vehicle electrification. So maybe 30C, I don't know, but I love all my children.
Yeah, I won't tell the other ones that you've picked one. I'm going to throw something down to JC and Jack, which is, first of all, I'm glad you mentioned, because we had conversations here all about the 10-year window, There is no 10-year window on the clean energy tax credits. It's 10 years or the later of 10 years, or the fact that 75% reduction from the sector, which would be that we've kind of got the thing on course. So, and that kind of pivots a little bit to, I want to ask you guys about the durability, just to speak to durability, because the other thing, and when we had a big conference on these issues over at the other school down the road, a lot of the conversation, that was Duke, if now to get the reference, a lot of the conversation was about, durability of these tax rates. Can we rely on them? We had like private equity groups and the like coming in, and to say they're pretty bullish on its durability. But if you could speak to it, because that's the one sort of limiting factor, how your members or how your financiers are thinking about these tax credits, permanent part of our economic system that they can rely on for their investment structures.
So I just spent 2 days in Houston at CERA, which is this big, massive energy thing, right? Conference, and started as an oil and gas thing in 2015, right thereabouts. Decided that clean was cool enough and big enough that they would give clean a spot at the end of the week, right after everybody had gone. Anyway, came back in and went back out, and now we're cool again, and this was kind of an interesting year for the natural gas sector. But a lot of talk about durability, and essentially, candidly, a lot because the IRA brought not just a lot of money, domestic money here, but also it brought foreign entities that had large U.S. footprints, specifically some of our IPPs or independent power producers, developers. It's brought a lot of capital into the market, right? Because they saw this signal, gee, isn't it great? Now they've gotten a little nervous, if we're totally honest. But I think this is here to stay. And why do I think it's here to stay? For years and years and years, this fits into kind of one side of the political equations, like invest and innovate versus tax and regulate. So this is investment and innovation. It also calls into question, if we're going to threaten these things, business certainty. And the one thing that will chase away investment, both foreign and domestic, is kind of like a real sense of uncertainty. Now, I don't think it hasn't caused anyone to stand on the sidelines yet. I think some of the things that Kristina is working out with government maybe have been more of a pause than this idea that this stuff might change. But also, you should know that from a political perspective, 70 to 80% of the economic benefit of these kind of tax credits and the investment and the projects and the manufacturing investment, it's going to be in red states and districts, right? Or what we consider politically red states and districts. So the benefit is, this is an economic benefit that kind of spans the political spectrum, which is why we don't talk about kind of it's good for one party or another. It's just good for America, right? It's good for our energy security. It's good for our kind of standing in the world from a climate and carbon perspective. It's good for our standing in the world as a place where that's friendly for investment. It's good from the perspective of trying to rebuild in a meaningful way the American industrial complex in a new and kind of innovative way. So that is all to say, I think at the end of the day, this is here to stay. Will there be a ton of noise if there's a certain political outcome in 25? Absolutely. There was a lot of noise in 2016, but I think this stuff is durable. I think it's here to stay. I think we work every day to make sure it is. Jason Gramey, who runs our association, is fond of saying that low probability, incredibly high impact, right? If things were to change in 25, but I think we are confident that this is here to stay.
Jack?
Yeah, I'll take a step back, Jason, kind of complimenting what you've said, and just say, why is so much of our energy policy done through the tax code? Part of the reason is because tax policy tends to be more resilient relative to others. It has less obvious conflicts with the federal-state dynamic, where like the federal government's authority to have federal tax policy is very clear. It has an effect on states, but it's not a direct conflict with state authorities. It's not an appropriations that needs to get renewed every year, or that is subject to kind of last-minute budget negotiations. It tends to have a longer life. And there's a general view that we want to have a system where you know what your taxes are going to be, you can plan for it, and once it's in law, it should be able to run its course so that all those kind of good faith investments, all those efforts can be respected and held together, so that even if you don't like a specific provision, you like the principle that tax policy should be stable. Those are all part of the reason that over the last, let's say, 30 years, we've had a large number of tax credits be in law, persist, and do good things. And I think that so long as those credits are creating a broad public benefit, and so long as industry and communities that benefit from them can show that and can communicate that well, they'll be in a good place. I feel that the 45Q credit in particular is resilient, relatively new, and it's something that we have a lot of confidence in is going to be able to go through. But it's all contingent on, do we do a good job in showing that it's in the public interest? Not just, does it help us do things that we want to do, but does it actually provide a benefit to society at large? And we have to fulfill that in what we do, and then we have to communicate it out and make sure that people see it and understand it.
Tim, can I add one thing?
Sure.
So Jack kind of helped me remember that we spent, I guess, this week at CERA, and it's been fascinating because this, as Jack said, it's not just about clean, right? There's something in the IRA for pretty much the entire energy family, nuclear, the low carbon investments that are coming from major oil companies, Jack's company, the clean credits. And so what you saw this week was a lot of different industries talking about the parts of the Inflation Reduction Act they like, right? Publicly. So what does that mean? It means that while they might not support everything, or they might want to defend everything, there are constituencies that have big political voices and represent hundreds of billions of dollars of capital and investment in domestic energy production and energy security, saying this is a good thing. So at the end of the day, right, it becomes very hard to Congress takes a hatchet, not a scalpel. It's very hard, I would say, to come in and pull different pieces and parts out of that when you have so many different constituencies saying they like what they have. And so, again, there'll be attempts, there have been already, but I do think at the end of the day that because of the broad support across the energy landscape, I think this is something that's going to be around for a long time.
I keep now thinking about how you're talking about how Kristina's children are be safe, and she's now thinking.
House Republicans have tried to repeal the IRA in whole or in part 25 times.
I'm going to do one. I sort of want to do one more pass of questions, and I actually want to try and draw people in from the audience, so to give you forewarning to think about your questions. And I'll start at the end with Jack and JC and come back this way, which is, it is. We've been hearing it has been rocket fuel. Like there's been billions of dollars in investments, 45,000 transferability. Whatever. There is definitely something. Incredibly catalytic going on. What are the constraints that you fear will be the brakes on the systems? I'm going to let you fill in the blanks, and then what? Not just for Kristina, because it's not all her problem, but what can we do to try and minimize those brakes? Like what are the efforts we can make and the government can make and the investors can make to try and address those brakes that you might be seeing on the system?
I'll try to come up with the right analogy here on the tax credits as children, but the IRA, right, and this is just the nature of Senate rules and the political dynamics, right, is a fiscal policy. So almost every incentive, that could be put through the tax code to benefit, let's say, energy, decarbonizing the electric system, building up resilience, right? IRA is a very full-throated, robust fiscal program. There are a lot of those kids. It is not, they're cousins on grid reform, permitting, right? Like what we might think of as like substantive non-tax energy policy did not move ahead, right? They're not, I'm going to stop. I'm thinking of different analogies. But so there's a whole suite of, let's say, like real, what we would kind of more traditionally think of as energy policies that we have not moved forward with from, it could be as broad or as controversial as like carbon pricing, but even improving how different parts of the country work together to build out transmission lines and pipelines, just a huge number of other policies that we will need to get right. And the IRA, in a way, will make all of those problems much worse because there's so many more people interested in investing in generation and other aspects that will force some type of solution. But we need to get there. It's a little bit of you don't take medicine until you're sick. We're going to need to really take on those more substantive energy policy issues or really risk losing the big benefits that are being pushed through fiscally from the IRA. And I'll say, I think a part of a driver of this, and something that is different from the environment where IRA was passed, we've heard over the past few months this sense of like the 10 or 15 years of relatively flat electricity demand growth in the United States is coming to an end. Right, there was a great report that came out in November from Grid Strategies making that point clearly. And I'll say my takeaway from CERAWeek was that's going to go up on rockets with steroids, with just the AI data center driven, in addition to all the factories coming here, all the electrification of different parts of industry. The electricity demand is going to be incredible, and IRA was crafted with an intention to help address the climate crisis. There's also going to be the U.S. energy and electricity supply for economic, national security, for new industries, where we're going to need all of those incentives, plus all the infrastructure and, let's say, like complementary or more basic energy policies to make it work, because there's a huge amount of electricity demand coming, and I think it's super clear now, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it as a country.
So I think to build on that, right, the demand is explosive now, right? We spent a decade of level or no growth, right? So it really was this competition between generation sources. Like if I was getting something, then you weren't getting something, and it was all about avoided cost, and could a wind farm beat the avoided cost of gas, right? So, and at $3 that looked okay, and at $5 it was great, and at $2 it was bad for wind. So there's a lot of that, right? It's not that anymore. It's like, how can you build it fast enough now? And to Jack's point, I think there are two big things. One is transmission. Transmission doesn't just mean what happens at the federal government. It means what happens in organized markets. What does market design look like? How do we determine who pays across these broad regions, single cost methodology for cost allocation? What does it mean to connect these regions in some kind of minimum transfer capacity? What does it mean for capacity accreditation of certain kind of clean generation assets? What does it mean in an ancillary service market? What does it mean to have transmission planning and queue reform at FERC? All those things are going to matter, right? Because right now, there are some parts of this country where you have so much solar at a time of day that not even batteries are saving price, and so much wind at times of day that you have negative pricing because you're running for tax credits. So those are problems that can only be solved by being able to evacuate electrons and getting them to load, right? And so we've already built in the easy places, right? Now we're going to get harder. We got to do that, which leads me to the second point, which is how do we site and permit these projects? And that's not a federal issue. Sometimes it is when it's on federal land, offshore wind, right? It's all in federal waters, so that matters, and the federal government has a huge say in that. I was talking to Ben earlier today, and Ben was telling, I know that there are not a majority of states have state permitting regimes. North Carolina, I believe, has that, more or less. A lot of states have what we call local control, so county by county by county, right? And so what's the right mix of that to help us be able to get these projects in the ground? How do we won't always blame incumbent generation, but how do we kind of break through some of the opposition locally? Not just, it's across the board. Like NIMBYism is real. You're not citing a hell of a lot of new gas plants. You're not citing a lot of it's harder to cite wind and solar. So how do we do those things? What do we need to say? How do we need to engage with communities to show the benefits of this? Because we're moving fast, but not nearly fast enough. So, and I think those two things, the transmission and the siting and permitting challenges, are the things that will constrain us. Why does that matter? Because the load growth is explosive, and it is a positive sign for economic development. And so the power sector can't constrain. It is getting so crazy right now in the marketplace that a certain large data service provider is bringing
will remain nameless.
Is bringing a nuclear facility behind the meter, right? They have taken out of their market a nuclear facility to power their data farms, their server farms. That's not a symptom of a healthy kind of electrical generation kind of functioning market in the U.S., and we have to do better. And I think people are waking up to that across the energies family. It's just waking up to that is one thing, doing something about it is a complete other.
I just fully endorse and echo my co-panelists' comments. I think, the Inflation Reduction Act was designed to bring capital off the sidelines. It was designed to jumpstart a lot of development, and that is happening. And it's happening very fast. It can and I think will happen faster as we finalize guidance, as folks get better at using new tools, as financial products get standardized. But as I like to tell my colleagues at the Department of Treasury, the United States doesn't have a power grid. We have like a bunch of cats in a sack, and that's very hard to actually organize coherently. And all of the things that Jack and JC are saying, the federal government has some roles that we can play, and we're exercising the authorities that we do have to expedite transmission permitting where it crosses federal lands, to expedite permitting generally of energy infrastructure projects. We have really elevated consideration of permitting issues and roadblocks to literally the highest levels of political leadership in the administration that any administration has ever done. We meet quarterly on each of our priority sectors at the level of the White House senior advisors and the secretaries of the relevant agencies, literally because we know that we will fail if the projects don't actually get built, and if it is because some biological opinion somewhere ended up being held up for 3 months because of a staffing shortage. These are things that we can solve internally if we know about them, if we have eyes on them early enough, if we are committed as we are to moving resources around to deal with them. But there are dozens, hundreds of independent decision makers in governing our nation's electric system, and I don't have the solution right now for figuring out how to get all of those independent actors aligned and working creatively and working together to address the siting and permitting issues, to address the transmission issues, to address the interconnection queue issues that exist in multiple regions of the country. And we need to, and the folks who, both inside of government, in industry, also researchers and academics and activists and think tanks, need to focus more attention on those non-federal actors and what the policies, tools, incentives, convening structures can be to get better alignment among them, because otherwise you're going to see a lot of PUCs defaulting to doing what they know, which is building new gas that is, centrally located, dispatchable, and all of those things, and we will end up, getting set behind where we both want and desperately need to be in terms of driving the transition to a clean energy economy.
Jack?
Kind of just to build, I think we're all on the same page and we're affirming one another. But I think a really key point, Kristina, you make there is not the solution to every problem is not policy, or policy can only take you so far. There are elements of this that are social, cultural. How do we accept new infrastructure? And the element of it too, coming from industry, is not, as we look at this challenge, how do we succeed? It's not just policymakers, we need you to do A, B, and C. There's a lot that we have to get better at, and we have to innovate on, from, business models and technology, but also working with communities. And I think that as you're looking at the next 10, 20 years for power developers, your technology matters, low cost matters. The companies that are able to get buy-in from their communities, show their track record of being able to work well with them, that's going to be the competitive advantage, because if you're that binary, can you build it or not, is going to define who's successful and who's not. And that's going to be something that I think the industry has gotten a lot better at, will need to get better at, and prioritize, not just as it's not like a bolt-on sustainability or community relations approach, but that's like the core of the business. That is the business.
I just want to capture like, I think trying to restate to you, Kristina, what you were sort of encouraging those in the think tank academic world is, there's a lot of non-federal policy actors out there. I mean, I was hearing, we've got to figure out how we motivate the RTOs that manage our grid. We have to figure out how we motivate the PUCs. We have to figure out how we motivate the communities not to block things. There's work to be done, sort of not just thinking this is like a top-down appropriations rider will fix it, but actually to do the sort of sweat equity to figure out how all these organizations can work together and innovate to bring it. All right, 5 minutes left. Let me ask for questions. Ian Hitchcock right there.
You knew I'd have one. Thanks, y'all. I really appreciated this panel. I'm a student at Tim's over at Duke at the Sanford School of Public Policy studying energy and environmental policy. Jack, I really appreciated the point you just raised about the importance of culture. And I want to ask about that in the context of the energy communities provision specifically. So, Kristina, I'm from rural Wyoming. I've just spent some time out in Gillette talking to folks about these issues. And one of the things they told me was that they didn't love the language of the federal government, and that the language that these energy communities tend to speak and feel comfortable with is not net zero, climate reduction, disadvantaged communities, but there are other ways in which they want to think of themselves. So I'm wondering, kind of, the one question for you on the policy side, when you're issuing guidance, thinking about guidance, how are you thinking about couching language and requirements in such a way that is not, that understands the cultural dynamics and the language of the kinds of energy communities that are largely conservative, largely rural? And then JC, I'd love your thoughts on just generally how the energy community provisions in the tax code are encouraging or not kind of changes in where industries are placing their facilities. Thank you.
That's a really great and thoughtful question. I really appreciate it. We actually, so there are the provisions in the law that we discussed to drive more private sector investment and economic development and opportunity. But this has actually been something that has been a policy priority and an organizing priority in many ways for this administration. From the first month that the president was in office, he issued an executive order that created an interagency working group on coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization, which is super catchy. We call it the Energy Communities, IWG for short. But what that has done for the first time ever is it created a secretariat at the Department of Energy that organizes across all of the federal agencies, across the EPA, across HUD, across DOE, across Interior in some instances, transportation, and identified a series of priority communities across the country that have seen significant declines in employment or in investment and economic opportunity, as particularly coal has fallen as a share of U.S. power generation, and as employment in that industry has declined as a result. And really the approach that entire effort has taken has been to engage on the ground in those communities in a cross-governmental way in partnership with the local with local community organizations, with local governments, with state governments. They have actually an amazingly productive working relationship with the governor of Wyoming, who is typically not a huge fan of the things that we get up to in the federal government on energy policy. And it has really been about place by place, person by person to some degree, what do you need to make this future work for you? And in some places it's housing. In some places it's, finding ways to replace lost local tax revenue for schools. In some places it's job training. In some places, it's these new power sector investments. And so I think the main thing that we have been trying to do, though I understand that because that all of that nuance does not get reflected by the media, it does not get reflected on social media, and it takes time and effort and outreach for folks to hear that message is more nuanced than what the headlines might necessarily say. We've seen some really amazing partnerships and amazing progress, and actually have managed to convince Congress that what we're doing is worth them actually funding. So they actually increased our funding for running the IWG in the last supplemental minibus whatever thing that they did, not the one that they're hopefully passing right now so that I can fly home tomorrow, but the one that they did a couple of weeks ago. So we have additional resources to do that work, which really is just like it's organizing, it's listening, it's taking a very different approach to what the federal government typically does, and we're very committed to it and to continuing to drive it forward, and hope that the message will slowly percolate in the communities that need to hear it.
So two parts. One is we're spending a lot of time and resources focus grouping, right? So just the classic, how do we talk about this? How is it receptive to different audiences? The rural audience is obviously very different from a coastal audience, from an urban audience, and so we're learning. If I'm really honest, how is it changing behavior? As you know, these projects have a huge lead time, right? So right now, if a project happened to be in a footprint that's going to be energy community, that's great, right? They'll take advantage of that. But I do think going forward, as Kristina said, this will drive behavior. And I know it will because we've heard our developers talk about it as they go prospect for new projects, as they look at kind of where the next wave of their investment will be. They are looking at this as it's doing what it was intended to do, which is it's driving that discussion for people that are making investment decisions. But for right now, I can't say that it's necessarily changed behavior yet. We're too new to the game.
Just one point on culture. What might be interesting, what people may not know, and probably not be wearing a suit here, but like if you know the people who work in the wind industry, it's a blue collar industry, right? The Voice in Washington, or like the advertising campaigns that you see that are really clean cut and all that. There is like a cultural difference, but if you Google tower climbing grease monkeys, that's an awesome like apparel group, and those guys are like touring around all the countries working with different techs. So I think there is this element of parts of the country who rightly feel like they've worked for decades to keep the lights on, to do mining, to do resource development, and then they're getting bypassed or not forgotten. And so there's an element of not just are they included, but do they still feel like protagonists in the energy story, which is probably a good term on a college campus to use. Like that, there has to be that element of making sure people feel that they have a big role to play. And I think the reality is they do. We're going to need like all of those resources, all those talents that people have. But I think sometimes things do get lost in like a total policy discussion versus like what does the industry actually look like? Who are the people who are really working in it?
All right, I've been told that we are at time, so that we had a grand total of one question, but we really appreciate it. This has been a tremendously substantive and engaging conversation, so I thank the three of you for taking the time, sharing with the people in the room, and please join me in thanking this.